The studio lights were blinding, sterile as ever, but tonight the air in Studio B was thicker, weighted with something unseen. Beneath the polished smiles and scripted sound bites, something dangerous simmered. Jessica Tarlov sat still in her chair, arms tense on the table, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The segment was only 6 minutes in, but already her heart thudded against her ribs like a prisoner begging for release. Across the table, Judge Jeanine Pirro leaned forward with that familiar smirk, the one that wrapped venom in charisma. Her voice cut through the discussion like a dagger dipped in elegance. "Well, Jessica, perhaps if you spent more time understanding American law and less time crying victim, you might actually contribute something of value tonight." Jessica blinked, hard. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Not this time. For months, Jeanine's jabs had come cloaked in professional language, but tonight they were barbed, personal, and deliberate. Jessica's fingers gripped the edge of the desk beneath her, not just out of anger, but desperation. Her voice trembled, but it carried. And maybe, if you weren't busy covering for corrupt donors and sleeping with your producers, you'd remember what journalism actually looks like. A sharp inhale rippled through the control room. Off camera, a floor director flinched. Jeanine's eyes darkened, her polished facade cracking just enough to reveal the ice beneath. "You've just made a very serious mistake." The tension shattered like glass. Jessica pushed back her chair, rising to her feet. The mic on her blouse picked up the quickening pace of her breaths. Jeanine stood too, and suddenly it wasn't a debate. It was a showdown. Shouts erupted. One of the camera operators yelled, "Cut the feed! Cut it now!" The screen blinked to black. Behind the scenes, chaos exploded. Jessica lunged, not in violence, but in a desperate bid to be heard, to expose the truth she had bottled up for too long. Security barreled in, separating the two women, but not before Jessica screamed, an anguished, garbled sentence lost in the storm. "You know what she did. You all know." She thrashed against the guards, hair tangled, blazer torn, mascara streaking down cheeks flushed with fury and heartbreak. Jeanine stood back, untouched, her lips curling in calculated silence. As Jessica was dragged from the stage, a final glimpse, those tear-glossed eyes, wide with betrayal and something darker, the burden of truth. This wasn't a television spat. This was the moment years of psychological warfare, manipulation, and personal wounds ruptured in the most public way possible. And beneath the headlines to come, beneath the viral clips and media spin, a secret still waited to be unearthed. It wasn't just a fight on live TV. It was the breaking point of a years-long descent into manipulation, betrayal, and one unspeakable secret. Long before the cameras ever caught a whisper of the storm, the cracks had already begun to split wide open beneath the surface. Inside the glittering hallways of Fox News, beneath layers of dry makeup and forced smiles, a war waged in silence. The building, though pristine and echoing with professionalism, pulsed with unspoken tensions. In this world, loyalty was currency, truth a liability, and secrets were often more valuable than ratings. Jessica Tarlov had never truly belonged there, and she knew it. Her voice, sharp with intellect and tinted with compassion, often found itself outnumbered on the air and unwelcome in hushed newsroom circles. She played the role of the contrarian well, but off camera, the isolation was deafening. Her days ended in silence, her phone buzzing less frequently than it used to, the texts from Miles, once constant, now long gone. Miles Anders had once been more than just a colleague. They had shared late-night takeout during chaotic news cycles, exchanged glances that lingered longer than they should have, and whispered about escaping the toxic game entirely. Their relationship had been real, raw, and thrilling, until it wasn't. Now, he was just another ghost, his presence lingering painfully in every meeting, every shift of the teleprompter, every laugh he shared with Jeanine. Jessica had discovered the affair by accident. A missed cue led her backstage early one afternoon, where laughter and hurried whispers gave way to the unmistakable intimacy of a stolen moment. Miles's hand on Jeanine's lower back. Jeanine's sultry laugh. Jessica had stood frozen, watching. Her past collide with her nemesis in the most devastating way imaginable. From that day forward, Jeanine didn't hide it. Her on-air barbs sharpened, always towing the line of professionalism while slicing just deep enough to bruise. Some of us earn our airtime with facts, not feelings. Or, perhaps if you focused on your arguments rather than your heartbreak, you'd be taken more seriously. They were subtle enough for producers to ignore, but they landed like daggers. Jessica, battling the double wound of betrayal and humiliation, found herself unraveling slowly. Her confidence eroded, her expressions more guarded, her sleep restless and filled with memories she wished she could burn. Jeanine played her part well. Stern but radiant, disciplined yet magnetic. Behind that courtroom voice and piercing stare was a woman obsessed with control. She knew how to keep secrets buried and rivals silenced. Jessica wasn't a threat to her career. She was a liability to her legacy, one that needed managing. Miles, stuck in the middle, said little. His silence hurt more than his betrayal. He watched Jessica suffer without a word of comfort, trapped by ambition and seduced by Jeanine's influence. In the few brief moments when their eyes met across the studio, something flickered. Guilt, maybe regret, but it was always too faint, too late. The air around them thickened with unspoken grudges. Every live segment felt like a powder keg, one wrong word away from explosion. The control room whispered about the tension. Makeup artists traded glances. Even interns picked up on the sharpness behind every smile. The network thrived on conflict, but they didn't know how close it was to turning real. Jessica stood alone, her world narrowing, haunted by what she knew, what she felt, and what no one dared to say aloud. She hadn't just been betrayed by a lover. She was being buried by the very machine she helped keep running, and it was only a matter of time before something broke. The breaking point wasn't loud. It came in the form of silence. A cold, digital paper trail hidden deep in the station's internal archive, unearthed not by accident, but by obsession. Jessica had stayed late, long after the last lights dimmed, and only the static hum of electronics filled the air. A tip from a low-level researcher had led her to a discarded thumb drive, left in a drawer marked Miss Curious, Archive B. What she found made her stomach twist. A chain of emails, dated, encrypted, but not deleted, between Jeanine and a shadowy PR fixer. The messages were surgical in tone, arranging the quiet removal of investigative reports into campaign financing. Misconduct tied to a sitting senator. The same one who'd recently toasted Jeanine at a charity gala. But what truly shattered Jessica wasn't the corruption. It was Miles's name casually woven into the threads. He had been copied in, directed, used. Keep Tarlov distracted. She's too emotional. Play on that. She trusts you. Use it. The screen blurred as her eyes filled. Her hand hovered over the mouse, the heat of betrayal seeping into her skin. She sat frozen, breath ragged. Not just silenced. Played. She didn't sleep that night. She waited. Waited. For Miles in the empty conference room the next morning, armed with her truth and shaking with resolve. When he entered, his surprise quickly morphed into a thin mask of concern. "Jess, what's this about?" Her voice was low but shaking. "Don't act like you don't know. I saw the emails. I saw everything. You let her use you to control me." His face didn't flinch. Instead, he exhaled, slowly, then stepped closer. "You're tired. You've been under pressure for months. I think you're reading too much into this." "Don't gaslight me," she snapped. "Don't you dare turn this around. I trusted you." His voice grew colder. "You're unraveling, Jess. Everyone sees it. Maybe take a step back before you do something reckless." The slap of his betrayal echoed louder than his voice, and it pushed her toward the edge she'd tried so hard to avoid. Later that day, she was summoned to Jeanine's private office, a space that smelled like perfume and power. The blinds were drawn, the air suffocating. Jeanine stood by the window, sipping black coffee with the elegance of someone who had built an empire from sharp smiles and sharper knives. "I know what you think you found," she began, her tone almost maternal. "But careful who you try to expose, Jessica. This network doesn't protect victims. It buries them." Jessica stared, jaw tight. "You think that scares me?" Jeanine turned slowly, eyes glittering. "I think you're scared of yourself. And I think you should be." Those words stayed with Jessica longer than she expected. That night, she paced her apartment, shadows dancing against the walls, haunted not just by betrayal, but by herself. Memories clawed back of the whistleblower she once promised to protect, a man whose life was destroyed after Jessica's rushed. Reporting accidentally revealed his identity. He had trusted her, too, and she'd failed him. That mistake had nearly ended her career. Now it returned with a vengeance, whispering doubts into her every thought. But something in her had shifted. Guilt became fire. Shame hardened into resolve. She knew what she had to do. She would not be silent again. The next debate segment was only days away. She began crafting a plan. Carefully worded statements, facts disguised as talking points, moments scripted to cut through the polished lies. She would expose Jeanine. She would bring the truth to air no matter the risk. But as she built her arsenal, Jeanine was already one step ahead. In the shadows of the control room, producers huddled over a manila envelope. Inside, notes, psychological reports, and carefully selected footage, evidence of Jessica's emotional instability. Jeanine's whispers had become commands. The ambush was set, and Jessica, walking into that studio with vengeance in her eyes, had no idea she was already standing in a trap. The tension in the studio was electric, almost tangible. Long before the cameras started rolling, the debate had been billed as a conversation on justice reform, neutral on paper, but everyone on set could feel the undercurrent of war. Producers whispered tighter instructions into earpieces. Interns avoided eye contact. Even the host seemed to walk on glass. Jessica sat upright, hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding like a ticking bomb. Jeanine, dressed in crimson, radiated calm. Calculation. The red light blinked on. Live. It began, predictably. Polished talking points exchanged with tight smiles. Jessica's voice remained steady as she laid out her arguments, facts organized, logic precise. But Jeanine, ever the master of timing, waited, coiled like a serpent behind her smirk. Then it struck. Jeanine leaned in slightly, her tone dripping with faux concern. "It's brave of you to speak on justice, Jessica, given your past misjudgments. Not every journalist recovers after destroying an innocent man's life, do they?" Blow was surgical. Jessica's breath caught. The room seemed to still. "You've always been passionate," Jeanine continued, twisting the knife. "But passion doesn't equal stability, and understanding political systems requires a bit more clarity than emotion can offer." Jessica's jaw tightened. She saw the glint in Jeanine's eye, that calculated coldness hidden behind fake warmth. Something snapped inside her. A dam breaking after months of silence, lies, and betrayal. Without waiting for a cue, she reached under the desk, pulled out a folder, and slammed it onto the surface in front of her. "This," she said, voice quivering but firm, "is a record of deliberate media suppression, coordinated by Judge Jeanine Pirro. Emails, a video, documents showing she buried investigations tied to campaign fraud, and manipulated colleagues to keep me quiet." Gasps rippled through the studio. A producer gestured wildly off camera. Jeanine didn't flinch. She gave a soft chuckle, tilting, her head like a patient schoolteacher. "Oh, Jessica, you poor thing. You've always needed an enemy to make sense of the world, but obsession isn't evidence, and emotional breakdowns aren't journalism." Jessica's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. "Don't twist this. People deserve to know." Jeanine cut her off smoothly. This is what mental decline looks like, folks, and it's heartbreaking to watch. A hush fell. Jessica's eyes burned with fury and helplessness. She stood, stepping forward, not with aggression, but with desperate urgency, trying to speak, to finish her sentence. Her voice cracked. "This isn't about me. It's about the truth." But security had already begun moving. Hands gripped her arms, gently at first, then with urgency as she resisted. The camera feed abruptly cut to a commercial. Viewers never saw Jessica scream, "She's lying. She's controlling everything." The hallway outside the studio was colder than she remembered. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Jessica stood breathless, heart racing, staring at the woman who had orchestrated it all. Jeanine stepped forward, calm as ever. Her voice dropped to a whisper, venom disguised as velvet. "This was your last broadcast, Jessica." Jessica stared. Back, tears stinging her eyes, fury choking her words. Jeanine smiled, victorious, merciless, and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor like the closing of a cell door. The silence after the storm was deafening. Within hours of the broadcast's abrupt cut, Fox issued a statement dripping in corporate detachment. Effective immediately, Jessica Tarlov is placed on indefinite suspension due to concerns regarding her emotional well-being. There was no mention of the dossier, no mention of corruption, just a clean, quiet dismissal wrapped in the guise of care. Clips flooded the internet, heavily edited montages reducing Jessica's desperation to melodrama. A screen grab of her reaching for the folder was replayed with mocking captions. "Jessica. Snaps. Live on air." Late-night hosts joked. Memes spread. Her credibility bled out like an open wound, unseen but fatal. Behind the scenes, the private investigation Jessica had triggered, what little of it had even taken root, was quietly buried. Sources vanished. Paper trails evaporated. Whispers of a federal review disappeared overnight. Jeanine returned to the air 3 days later with a radiant smile and a segment about law and order. Her name was never mentioned in connection to the scandal again. Miles, whose silence had echoed louder than any betrayal, resigned under the cloak of a vague, personal leave. He vanished from the public eye entirely. Jessica never received a goodbye, a text, not even a single line of explanation. Only the bitter realization that her fight had always been hers alone. Shunned and exhausted, Jessica disappeared too, this time by choice. No cameras, no interviews. She left the city and relocated to a cabin miles from the nearest town, where she could breathe without being followed by whispers. The only thing she didn't leave behind was the truth. Weeks later, a simple video appeared on a forgotten corner of the internet. Jessica sat in front of a window, light falling on her face like truth refusing to die. No makeup, no rehearsed lines. Just her, eyes swollen from nights without sleep, voice calm but steady. "I wasn't perfect," she said softly. "I've made mistakes. But I wasn't lying." She laid it all out, how evidence was destroyed, how alliances turned into traps, how truth became a weapon used against her. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't cry. But in every pause, in the quiet heartbreak behind her eyes, there was a depth that couldn't be faked. The video exploded. Tens of millions watched. Some scoffed, calling it damage control. Others wept, recognizing the agony of being silenced. Hashtags surged. Debates raged. Jessica Tarlov became a symbol. For some, a warning. For others, a martyr. The final frame lingered. Her eyes stared into the camera, hollow from everything she'd lost but burning with what still remained. The silence after Jessica's viral confession was louder than applause, louder than criticism. It was the kind of silence that forces people to sit with discomfort, to wrestle with the version of truth they'd just heard, and the ones they'd accepted before. Her face faded from screens. Headlines moved on. The world, ever hungry for the next scandal, began to forget. But some didn't. In living rooms and quiet corners of the internet, people rewatched her final words, pausing on her eyes. Not to mock, but to search for the sincerity others had overlooked. The narrator's voice broke the stillness, not as a verdict, but a reflection. The truth isn't always welcomed, especially when spoken by the broken. The words weren't cold, they were heavy, like a confession of complicity. In a world ruled by optics and power, the loudest lies are the ones rehearsed for camera. Jeanine's laughter still echoed through polished studios. The truth, by contrast, came barefoot and bloodied, asking only to be heard. Jessica sought justice, but justice lives in shadows, where whispers become echoes no one wants to hear. That's where Jessica had spoken from. Not a podium, not a teleprompter, but from a place raw and ruined, where love had turned to betrayal and conviction had left her isolated. There was no final judgment. No gavel slammed. No prison doors. Closed. Just a lingering question, like smoke that won't clear. Who do we believe? And deeper still, what are we willing to lose to hear the truth at all? The screen faded to black, but her hollow defiant stare remained. Not a plea. Not a goodbye. Just a reminder that sometimes the ones silenced are the only ones who ever dared to speak.